Can Arsenal still win the league with 0 strikers? Is Lisandro Martinez's injury that big of a deal? And how much do Crystal Palace need Cheick Doucoure back? Well, today we're going to answer those exact questions and rank the players whose seasons have ended due to injury and how big of an impact their absence will have on their teams. But with one caveat, we're starting from today until the end of the season. We're focusing on the run-in, and we're going to start with Lisandro Martinez. Now, is it going to completely derail Man United's season, or are there just no solutions? Or does it just shift Man United's season entirely? Although their impact is big, it will just cause a tactical or mindset shift from the Man United players to cope with the loss of the Argentine. Can Man United cope with the loss of one of their captains on the pitch, and actually things will be okay? Or have Man United forgotten that their centre-back is injured? I don't think it's quite that one. I do think that he slightly struggled in the earlier stages of Amorim coming into this Man United team, but there's no denying that Lisandro Martinez is one of the biggest characters in the dressing room, combined with the overall mobility of the player and being able to step into those midfield areas where Man United want to press high, and those centre-backs are used to follow their men quite deep into the pitch. So ultimately, combined with the character and the adaptability of the player, there certainly should be a pressure for Man United to really kick on and give Amorim the best springboard into the next season. And losing one of their best centre-backs, if not their best, to me, there seems like there's no solutions. Go into the second highest category in this video. And that's just the first player. There's still 10 more players that we're going to rank their impact of their injury on their teams. Some will completely derail their team's season, and others, their fans didn't even realise that their season had ended. So, next we have Radu Dragusin, picking up a serious knee injury at the end of January in the Europa League. Once again, it feels like Spurs don't have any reliable centre-backs that can last them a full campaign without suffering some sort of traumatic injury specifically to the knee or hamstring. And that's going to go into the decision on where we place the Romanian in this list. Of course, new signing Kevin Danso does help the situation slightly, but then you're also relying on a kid like Archie Gray, who has had to step up this season immensely alongside Andrea Postecoglou and his idea and philosophy of how he wants to play football. And although he has slightly tweaked the specific tactical details in recent weeks, the philosophy of attacking football with no real regard for overall game state does show that there isn't ever really going to be a shift in how Spurs approach games. Therefore, they need to rely on the centre-backs that they have on their books, and right now they can't. Now, saying all that, looking closer, Radu Dragusin only really came into the team around the start of November, but since that moment has only picked up 3 Premier League wins, 5 in all competitions. And that winning record, combined with some severely average defensive stats, although Spurs don't need more injuries and losing the centre-back for the rest of the season will cause problems, specifically for journalists in press conferences, it doesn't feel like Dragusin is going to have that same sort of impact if he was in the team. And the anticipation on his return doesn't feel as high as it does around other teams and other players. We're going to put him in the season shift category. The impact will definitely be felt, but ultimately it just needs a change and shift in direction. Next up, we're looking at Michail Antonio. Now, this one's a bit of a strange one. The injury coming outside of the football pitch, but affecting West Ham's season nonetheless. And when you look at the striking options to replace what has been their main man, it does look fairly dire, even with the introduction of Evan Ferguson. Now, it is important to note that even at the start of the season, Antonio was struggling for form. He didn't quite fit Lopetegui's football and certainly started the campaign off slow. But we're talking about a player here that's been an excellent servant for West Ham. And when we look at West Ham's season as of right now, despite their 10-point gap from any sort of relegation zone, ultimately they need to secure their safety and make sure that a club like West Ham remain in the Premier League. and they need to focus on scoring. And a player that last season was able to score against the likes of Liverpool, Newcastle, Villa, Chelsea and Brighton, it does feel like they're missing a big game player in Mikel Antonio. And despite them now hiring Graham Potter, who's a far better fit, we do need to look at how they've been scoring. And they failed to score on 8 different occasions so far this season, which is just 3 away from the entirety of last season. But we do need to remember that the main attacking threat coming from West Ham isn't usually Antonio, it's Jarrod Bowen, with Kudus and Souček helping out alongside him. So although I wish Antonio a speedy recovery, I do think West Ham can make do with what they have up front and score enough goals to secure their safety for another year. They can cope. Now, I think it's time we put a player in the bottom category, a player that maybe even the fans didn't even realise that was injured. Now, this one might be harsh for this player because ultimately they did start the first 5 games of the season before tearing both their MCL and ACL, and with the manager being sacked since then after struggling at the bottom of the table, with a new manager coming in with slightly similar ideas but certainly an uptick in form, it does feel like for now the team has moved slightly away from this centre-back. The player I'm talking about is Yerson Mosquera, who was on loan last season at Villarreal, certainly a young centre-back who will definitely play a role in this Wolves team in the near future. But for now, right at this moment, for Wolves' upcoming fixtures as they look to secure that safety and not go down, which seemed like a certainty earlier on in the season, for now, it's wait, when? Now, from one knee injury to another, from one player slightly on the outskirts of their team looking to make an impact next season, to a player right in the centre and heart of their team's success. We're going to look at Rodri, and I think you might not agree with where I'm about to put him. Rodri, of course, damaging his ACL versus Arsenal super early on into the season. I think he only managed around 2 appearances for Man City. That's how little we've seen the best midfielder on the planet this season. But in the month after the Rodri injury, City didn't quite dip in form like you would have expected. But since then, it's been dire straits. Man City have never looked more rocky, and people are pinning it on the loss of the Spaniard, with the replacement being mainly Kovacic. And Man City seem to be conceding counter-attacks and transitions easier than ever. However, if we were ranking these injury impacts right when it happened, I would have put it as a season derailer, because that's what it has been. But now, after the January window, with Man City bringing in an immense amount of talent, but focusing on the replacement, Nico Gonzalez, combined with the coaching that cannot be doubted from Pep Guardiola, I don't think the Rodri injury can be blamed anymore. So today, I'm going to put it as a season shift, because ultimately this City side aren't the same without Rodri. But it isn't a season derailer, and certainly there are solutions. It sits in the middle of the pack for me. So from the champions being decimated to the contenders also being decimated, Arsenal are without any strikers for the rest of the season, with Havertz and Jesus out on the sidelines for the foreseeable future. With a Premier League title in their scope, they're going to have to do it with the likes of Trossard, Sterling, and a 17-year-old. Now, it's no secret that Gabriel Jesus hasn't been that reliable front man that Arsenal would have hoped that they had bought at the start of the 22-23 campaign. And since picking up that knee injury in the middle of that Premier League season, he's really struggled for consistency, not only in playing time, but also contributing in goals and assists. And although he picked up a great bit of form right before that ACL tear, there's no doubt that Arsenal weren't relying on the Brazilian this season. But when aiming to win a Premier League title, you certainly need to rely and lean on the outer trims of your squad, and whether or not that's the young players coming through, or it's a player that's on the bench but has been there and done that before. And as the pressure builds on Arsenal towards this final third, looking to make up that points gap, having a player coming off the bench or starting certain games that has been there, done it, and won the trophy, it would have been an unsellable sellable asset for Mikel Arteta, and now he's just not there. So for now, quite fittingly, we're going to put him in the no solutions category. And you'll have to wait and see if Kai Havertz is a true season derailer or it's not as bad as everyone thinks. Now, this next player might not have pulled their hamstring in the heat of Dubai. He did it on the south coast, within walking distance of the Brighton Pier. Igor, the man with the scariest name ever. With the Brazilian centre-back starting 15 games under Hertzler, only to be replaced when he got injured by Adam Webster, who himself was coming off the back of a 13-game absence, it does feel like the defensive options at Brighton are quite precarious. However, if we delve into the stats, the centre-back actually has a lower tackle success rate than both Van Hecke and Lewis Dunk. That, combined with 7 appearances on the bench, is certainly proves that he's not the main man, the leader of that defensive line. And if we look at Brighton's season, it can kind of be described as average. They at times can be giant killers, picking up massive wins over big teams, and then fail to pick up points and wins where maybe you would have expected them to. So potentially having that extra body at the back and not having to call upon the likes of Veltman to step into more of a centre-back position at times potentially could have added a little bit more stability for Hertzler's first season. So I really struggled on whether or not Brighton can actually cope without the use of a man with a name like an Avenger, or actually it will be a season shifter, and that over-reliance on the likes of Van Hecke and Lewis Dunk would be detrimental. Maybe lose a game 7-0, who knows? But in order to not undervalue the importance of these Brighton players and a schedule mixed potentially with FA Cup fixtures and only 6 points off Chelsea, i.e. European football, I think Brighton should be looking upwards in the table, and therefore losing one of their centre-backs, it could be a bit of a season shifter. Now, if I struggled ranking the last player, I'm definitely going to struggle ranking this one, and it's Leicester's Fatawu. In order to really understand the impact of missing the Ghanaian, I think we need to look at Leicester's season overall, and as they sit in 19th position with the 3rd lowest goals, there's no doubt they need an impact, they need a spark, and Fatawu is exactly that, and he isn't available. He didn't miss the entirety of the campaign. He did make 11 appearances, only picking up 2 assists, however, but coming into a new league, maybe we should look at the previous season where he got 6 goals and 13 assists in a flourishing attack with him in it. So naturally there's going to be a slight adjustment period coming into the Premier League, an adjustment period that he didn't really get to reap the rewards from. So at the minute it looks like a problem with no solutions. Leicester's only real spark outside of Jamie Vardy is on the sidelines, but Leicester did change their manager midway through this season. Ruud van Nistelrooy has come into the helm at the King Power, and he hasn't had Fatawu to pick from. Potentially he hasn't had to shift as much as you might have thought. And I think that last point makes me want to put it in the season shift category, because since Ruud van Nistelrooy has walked through the door, the picture hasn't quite changed. Fatawu hasn't been on the books. For now, we'll leave it there, tentatively. It feels like, sadly, ACLs are a bit of a theme this season, and one of the latest players to suffer with the knee injury is Ipswich's Wes Burns. Now, I want to be respectful of the player here, because I understand he's a well-liked player in the squad and from the fans, and coming from the lower leagues, the opportunity to play in the Premier League and then suffering a devastating knee injury away at Liverpool, it feels like a season derailer from a personal point of view. But I feel like I need to be a bit more ruthless than that. And when I look at some of the players and the impact of their absence on this board, do I think that Wes Burns is the key to keeping Ipswich up? I don't quite think so. Now, although they don't have an exact replacement for the role that Wes Burns has under Kieran McKenna, they do have a lot of talent in that Ipswich squad. Enough talent, in my opinion, that they still have a fighting chance to stay up, and therefore right now I think they can cope with the loss of Wes Burns. We've got 2 players left. left, and one of them is going to go into the bottom category. Maybe some fans from this club have kind of forgotten about this midfielder, despite them being player of the year for their club just a few seasons ago. Since then, they've made a respective 13 and 11 Premier League appearances. A player that has been completely hampered by injuries since that breakthrough season, and even this season, before needing knee surgery to end his campaign, actually missed 5 games already due to a toe injury. So joining the Wolves centre-back in the wait, when category is unfortunately Cheick Doucoure. And with players like Lerma and Adam Wharton ready to fill in for the defensive midfielder, it feels like Palace are doing really well without a player that once was one of their best. And now we're left with one. We've ranked all of the other 10 falling into their categories. Not quite falling, I put them there purposefully. And I want to say, if you disagree with any player I've put in any category, let me know down in the comments. But now it's time to talk about Kai Havertz. It's strange because arguments for Gabriel Jesus can also be applied to Kai Havertz, and yet the two players seem worlds apart in terms of comparison. Kai Havertz has been criticised no end for his lack of composure and ability to be clinical in front of goal, and yet he ends his season with 15 goals and 5 assists. So do we go along the lines of the criticisers and losing a player who wasn't seen as an important part of this Arsenal attack? Surely that wouldn't derail a season. But really, losing Havertz, I just don't think the truth lies in the stats. We just have to accept what we've been looking at, and that's that for the past 18 months, Mikel Arteta has trusted Kai Havertz. He is his number 9, and although some people argue he was just a failed 8, then shoved up top, ultimately he's been trusted alongside Odegaard to lead that front two, really direct the press out of possession, which I think he does brilliantly. And in a front line which just a few years ago Arsenal paraded as being one of the most adaptable, fluid front lines that spread their goals across the 3, it feels like Havertz is the perfect cog in that. Losing Gabriel Jesus is a massive hit, but that's what comes with the Brazilian. Kai Havertz, Mikel Arteta never really banked on losing him. And when the pressure felt like it was at its heaviest on Arsenal's shoulders, and Mikel Arteta has had to come through so much this season, both in his coaching to adapt to certain injuries, but certainly in some of the refereeing decisions, to have this final nail in the coffin in this Arsenal season, where if they're gonna win the Premier League, and it's a big if, they're gonna have to do it without any recognised number 9. That feels like, to me, it's a season derailer.